Have you ever really stopped to think about the invisible networks that bring you, well, everything? From your phone to the car you drive, we call them supply chains, and as we've all learned the hard way recently, they can be incredibly fragile. Today, we're digging into how the auto industry got hit by a decade of pure chaos and what we can all learn from the one company that didn't just survive, it actually came out on top.
So let's start with a bit of a riddle. What on earth do these three disasters have in common? I mean, you've got a money crisis, a natural disaster, and a public health nightmare. They seem totally unrelated, right? Well, it turns out they all hit the exact same pressure point. And there's your answer. For the car industry, with these incredibly efficient, globe-spanning production lines, these weren't just separate bumps in the road. Nope, this was one long, brutal stress test that pushed these companies to their absolute breaking point and really showed us who has built the last.
So, first up, let's take a closer look at this global stress test and how it uncovered a massive, hidden weakness right at the heart of modern manufacturing.
You see, for years, the absolute gold standard was something called just-in-time manufacturing. The idea was honestly brilliant. Parts show up right when you need them, you don't have to store tons of inventory, and you save a ton of money. It made companies super lean and efficient. But that leanness came with a hidden cost. It meant there was zero buffer, zero margin for error. The system was fast, but man, was it fragile.
And here's the timeline of that test. It kicked off in 2008 with a huge demand shock. People just stopped buying cars. Then, bam, 2011 hits with a devastating supply shock from that massive earthquake in Japan. And then, in 2020, came the final boss, a crisis that walloped both supply and demand all at once.
But through all that chaos, one company just seemed to navigate the storm way better than its rivals. So, let's open up Toyota's playbook for resilience.
So what was Toyota's secret weapon? Well, it wasn't just some clever business tactic. It's a whole culture, something they call the Toyota Way. And it's built on two core ideas: Kaizen, which is this obsession with constantly getting better, and respect for people. And that means everyone, employees, customers, and, this is the important part, their suppliers. And look, this isn't just some fluffy mission statement on a poster. As a former president, Fujio Cho said, these values are the actual source of their competitive edge. It's all about playing the long game, putting stability and partnership way ahead of any short-term win.
But that philosophy got put to the test big time in 2008. When the global economy tanked, Toyota's profits didn't just dip, they completely cratered. The company actually posted its first annual loss in decades. Their super efficient just-in-time model was suddenly wide open to a world that just wasn't buying. And the hit was huge. We're talking a 15% drop in global sales. For a system that's built on constant smooth flow, this was like hitting a brick wall at 100 miles an hour.
Now, Toyota did react fast with cost-cutting, but here's the move that changed everything. Where most companies would have squeezed their suppliers for every last cent, Toyota did the exact opposite. They knew their supply chain wasn't just a line on a spreadsheet, it was a long-term asset, so they actually worked with them to get through the storm together.
And just 3 years later, that partnership faced an even bigger test. The earthquake in Japan, it didn't just disrupt things, it shattered a critical piece of their network. Toyota's response was guided by another one of their core principles, Genchi Genbutsu. It basically means go and see for yourself. They didn't just manage from an office. They sent teams right into the disaster zone to help their suppliers get back on their feet.
That crisis was a painful but powerful learning moment. Toyota completely re-engineered its supply chain strategy. They started using multiple suppliers for critical parts. They standardized components so they could be swapped between different car models. And this is the absolute key. They built a buffer. They told suppliers of the most important stuff, like microchips, to keep 2 to 6 months of inventory on hand, a total reversal of pure just-in-time thinking.
And fast forward to 2020, this is where that foresight paid off, big time. When the pandemic hit and caused that massive global chip shortage, competitors' factories went silent. But Toyota? That chip buffer they built after the 2011 earthquake let them keep the assembly lines running. And that single decision vaulted them to become the #1 selling automaker in the US for the first time ever.
All right, so now let's contrast Toyota's proactive journey with its main rivals, Volkswagen and GM, because they learned some, well, very different lessons from these exact same crises.
This table really just lays it all out. In 2008, Toyota protected its partners while GM needed a government bailout. Then, in 2011, the earthquake in Japan barely touched Volkswagen, so they never felt the need to change anything. They didn't feel the pain, so they didn't learn the lesson. Jump to 2020, and both VW and GM get absolutely hammered by the chip shortage, the very crisis Toyota had spent nearly a decade preparing for.
And that's really the heart of it, isn't it? Being resilient isn't about never getting hit. It's about what you do after you get hit. Toyota took a punch in 2011, but they turned that pain into a massive strategic advantage. The others, who dodged that particular bullet, just kept on going until a different one finally caught up with them.
So, what are the bigger takeaways here? It turns out Toyota's story isn't just a fascinating business case. It's pretty much a perfect, real-world example of academic ideas about what makes some organizations so much more resilient than others.
These frameworks give us a blueprint to follow. For example, they show us that a company's culture directly shapes how it thinks about risk. Toyota's culture of partnership meant they saw their supply chain as something to protect, not just exploit. After 2011, they addressed vulnerabilities in their products, their processes, and those partnerships. It proves culture isn't just a buzzword, it's a strategic tool.
You know, probably the best way to think about all this is to compare it to our own immune system. You have innate resilience, that's your body's built-in, pre-planned defenses. In business, that's like having extra stock or multiple suppliers. But then you have adaptive resilience. That's your body's amazing ability to learn from a new virus and create antibodies so you're ready for it next time. That is exactly what Toyota did after 2011. They learned, they adapted, and they evolved.
Which brings us to this really key idea, the zone of balanced resilience. See, the goal isn't to be 100% invincible. That's just wasteful and slow. And it's definitely not to be 100% efficient. We've seen how fragile that is. The goal is to find that sweet spot, that Goldilocks zone, where your defenses, like a chip buffer, perfectly match your vulnerabilities, like needing a global supply chain.
So let's wrap this up. What does all this mean for the future? Well, it points to a really fundamental shift in how we need to think about building things and businesses that are meant to last.
For decades, the big conversation in business was always about finding the right balance between cost and quality. But the story of the last 20 years shows us there's a new and frankly more important trade-off we have to make now, the one between pure lean efficiency and smart strategic resilience.
So we'll leave you with this final thought. Efficiency makes you fast. Resilience makes you last. In a world that seems to be in a state of constant disruption, that choice isn't just a business strategy anymore. It's a survival strategy. So which one will you choose?